Welcome to Renaissance Minds. We're your co-hosts, Silvia Davi.
And Chris Vaccaro.
This is a show focused on exploring the minds of big thinkers across all walks of life while paying tributes to one of the most inspiring times in our history. We're in pursuit of modern day Renaissance-minded individuals, interesting, complex thinkers, and masters of their crafts, often balancing several talents and responsibilities. And our focus is to share their stories, multidimensional lifestyles, and journeys to educate and inspire you, the listener.
Renaissance Minds was inspired by Silvia's background, multifaceted attributes, and a very detailed career, plus her personal interests. And our shared Italian American heritage brought us together. And our combined interests and entrepreneurial spirits are bringing you this show. Renaissance Minds is underwritten by the Italian American Heritage Society of Long Island, and we're excited to dive into this episode.
Great. Well, very excited, Chris, today to welcome Andrew Cotto, who is a phenomenal author that really comes from a number of different backgrounds and also the editor-in-chief of Appetito Magazine. So welcome, Andrew. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me and for mentioning me as a big thinker. That's a first.
Well, you truly are a multidimensional Renaissance man, and you've built a career across fiction, journalism, food media, which I find fascinating. And you've worked for some very interesting publications and also are the founder of Appetito Magazine. What connects all these paths for you, and what has you as a born and raised Brooklyn, New York executive brought into, this multidimensional world that you've pursued as an author. So tell us about how being a New Yorker also has shaped your voice.
Sure. I mean, for me, it's I'm a storyteller at heart. So I never thought about food as being something other than a passion of mine that was sort of a side passion, something I enjoyed in my free time. And I really fell in love with literature when I was in college and decided I wanted to be a storyteller. And my storytelling began with fiction. I have a master's degree in creative writing from the New School with an emphasis on fiction. And after my first two novels were published, my agent said to me, "We're getting all these comments about the food writing in your books." And I said, "Food writing? I'm a novelist, right? I'm not a food writer." Right? But I started thinking about it, and it made sense. I was really using food as a device to further the story. Right? It wasn't I guess in reality, I love feeding people. I cook. I'm not a trained chef, but I've worked in restaurants. I know how to cook, right? And I love feeding people. It's one of my passions. And I guess that love of feeding people lent itself to feeding my characters, and that created some really unique scenarios within the books involving food, not just some sort of sensory thing, but as a device for developing character, plot, etc. That pivoted me towards journalism. I began writing pretty extensively for the New York Times. Then Rachel Ray's magazines, La Cucina Italiana, different things other than food. I was doing lots of sort of more mainstream journalism. I did some sports for the New York Times. I covered sort of like culture, family, sports, politics, parenting, but it all ended up sort of really more, getting more and more food focused as my career went on. Part of that was because a lot of these publications, were being more particular about who they were allowing to contribute to them. But the Italian food space was wide open for me. So I moved in that direction. So I do have this sort of multifaceted writing lanes, journalism, fiction, food media, but they're all related. They're all rooted very much in storytelling.
You're saying all the key words that we love. Storytelling, you're saying journalism, you're talking about the entrepreneurial spirit of building your own publication and co-founding Appetito and the digital elements of what you're trying to do of telling the stories on social and also just you're hustling. I see it every day. You're out there, you're on TV, you're on radio, you're doing podcasts, like you're right in line with how Sylvia and I act and think and feel. And so just bravo on hustling because that's what it takes when you're creating content. It's not going to find itself. But my question, or other than praising you, is the idea of co-founding Appetito and the going into that idea of launching a publication and trying to do it. Is it just a couple of you? How did it come about in terms of saying, we're going to do this on our own and we're going to ride this thing and this is going to be ours? And how's it going? How's the progress with all of it?
Well, it began rather innocently, in that I had no ambition of being an entrepreneur in the publishing world. But, I was writing.
Who
I was
does? It's not. It's grueling.
yeah.
So
And I wish I stuck with that mindset. No, I love it. It's incredible fun. But I was the editor-in-chief. So I pivoted towards being an editor-in-chief. I was the editor-in-chief of Italian American Magazine, which, Chris, that's how we met. We featured you.
that's right. Thank you very much.
And that sort of gave me a background in being an editor, being confident in not just writing my own stories, but with soliciting stories and assigning stories and shaping them to fit with the voice of a particular publication. That being said, I still like the paycheck. So there was someone else who was making the magazine physically and incurring the risk that was involved. But I was also writing extensively at the time for La Cucina Italiana, which was the Bible of Italian food magazines. They had a USA operation. They folded it during the pandemic. I went to my managing editor, this guy named Richard Martin, who's a food publishing veteran, in different genres, but also food. And I said, what do I do with all these stories I got about Italian, restaurants and personalities? He said, take them somewhere else. I try to take them somewhere else, but kind of what I mentioned before about the market not being really amenable to other people's, to all writers anymore. There was no place that wanted food stories about Italian restaurants, personalities, etc. So I went back to Richard and said, "Hey, there's an opportunity here. Right? This is the most popular food in the world. Right? This is before UNESCO declared it, but we all knew. Right? There's Italian restaurants all around the world. Right? There's not a country, at least a first or second world country that you can go to on this planet and there not be Italian food. People tell me the best Italian restaurants in the world are in Tokyo." So, I said there's a market for this, and no one's dedicated themselves exclusively to it. So let's jump in, and we did. It was 3 years. It'll be 3 years ago this summer, and it's amazing how we've had to sort of evolve. We were just a digital publication at first, and we sort of changed what we do. It's been incredibly fun. Yes, you were absolutely right. It is a lot of hustle. And I was already hustling with my novels and journalism. You got to be a freelance journalist, you have to hustle, right? To be an author of books, you have to really get out there because the publishers aren't going to help you very much. So I like the hustle, and with Appetito, it's been even more so because I got stake in the game, right? I got skin in the game, I should say. So I'm trying to make this magazine something that's amenable. And accessible to everybody, because I really believe in Italian culture and cuisine as being something that can really change people's lives.
I think it's fascinating, and I commend you because I think Appetito Magazine is really what brought us together, because I had been following it and really noticing the combination of food, culture, history, travel, all the things that I love. And you touched on one that I'm very passionate about, which is UNESCO World Heritage denominations. And I always am in pursuit of the history behind things and visiting UNESCO World Heritage sites. And I think what you and I know have discussed in the past, Andrew, is how fascinating it is that Italy has been giving this honor, the first and only culinary honor of its kind, recognizing that Italy treats the tradition of food and food history and the fact that each region has its depth in food and wine and drinks as part of its culture, right? So, tell us about that from your perspective, and what do you think this recent honor and designation by UNESCO will mean not only for here in this country for Italian food, but in general? What impact will it have among other cuisines?
I think it's an incredibly important destination. In fact, and it's something that most of us, or many of us who understand Italian cuisine, Italian American, Italian regional, understand how important it is to the world. Right? I mean, the designation, I believe, is like cultural heritage of humanity is the exact phrasing that UNESCO put. When I went on the BBC that night, that was announcing, I was interviewed by them about it, and they were like, "What do you think about this?" I was kind of like, "Duh." Right? We all knew this. We know that Italian food is the best food in the world, and it's not just there is the flavor components, the simplicity, and the attention to local ingredients, and the quantities they eat, which is sort of people misunderstand that, hey, Italians go home. You see the famous picture of the guy with the huge fork full of spaghetti go, right? That's a joke. Right? Italians know how to eat. So I think that there's that aspect of the cuisine, of course, which gets the conversation started, but it's so much deeper than that. It's lifestyle. Italian culture is really food. I mean, that's where it's rooted in. I mean, I argue that the Roman Empire was so successful because of what they were feeding legionnaires, right? And they used to walk around with big chunks of pecorino in their pocket on their marches so they can have extra sustenance. And now today they're trying to introduce like chunks of Parmesan and Parmigiano, I should say, and pecorino as like sports fuel. So like a power bar, you eat hard Italian cheese because they're so packed with protein. I think a lot of Italian success throughout millennia has to do with the importance of food in their culture. But it's bigger than that too. It's part of a community. One of my novels, Cucina Tipica, the character goes to Italy on holiday for the first time, and he loves food. It's his first time there, and he decides he's never going to leave. And the reason he's never going to leave is because really good food in Italy is accessible to everyone. Right? In the U.S., eating well is a privilege. In Italy, it's a right. They would never jack up the prices of food, and there would be a supermarket like a Whole Foods where people can't go into and afford the meats and the cheeses and the vegetables and the fruits because they're too expensive. In Italy, that's not true. You go into a restaurant in Italy, everybody can eat it. There's an osteria in every village, right? A trattoria where you can eat. There's high-end places too, but you can go out to eat. You can consume wine. When I lived in Florence for a year, it was 20 years ago, but I used to go to the consortium in the village with a giant jug of wine that held 5 bottles of Chianti Classico. They'd fill it for €9. Right? I'd put it in the baby seat and bring it home, like worried it was going to spill. But that's the point, is that in Italy, food is for everybody. Cuisine is for everybody, and that extends to their wellness. We met Silvia through the Cuomo, so Marietta Cuomo Mayor, right? She is our food and our wellness expert at Appetito, and so we have lots of contributions from her that don't even mention food. They mention other things like, during the holidays, if you feel a little glum, make sure you take a walk, make sure you get enough rest, make sure you spoil yourself a little bit, so that it extends from the table to, how we feel about our everyday lives. But it does begin at the table. And I will argue again and again and again that one of the best things in the world is being around a table with people that you care about, or even just met, right? And sharing food that's accessible to all of you. And that's what Italian food is.
There's influencers, there's people posting about food, there's people writing about food. It's so prevalent. I mean, especially in our world where all we do is follow sites and pages and people and influencers about Italian culture. Like, you can't scroll 2 seconds without seeing something about the death of Italian soccer and somebody that's rating a piece of pizza, or, really good recipes that are, delectable and that we need. How do you balance like the need for everybody wants it all? Like you even mentioned like the giant chunks of Parmesan Reggiano. There's people that specialize in stories or videos about wine. There's the Christian Petronis of the world with the first person over the top, crushing the garlic with the cool voice. Like, everyone's got a thing, and I love it all. But you, as a publisher, editor, trying to curate, like, how do you focus on what matters most for the content that you're putting out there? And do you see a specific demand for your audience that they look for in terms of the content?
Yeah, I think our audience is a little bit more mature, whether in reality by age or just by like tastes. So we tend to stay away from sort of the gimmicky stuff. And when I know there's a space for like slapping people around with mozzarella, and the stereotypes and things. That's not really our style. It's fine, but we can't spread ourselves that thin to include everything. So we try to stay more in the educational space, in the lifestyle space. We try to keep we love educating. We want people to feel welcome at the site. So we do have lots of recipes. Of course, there's always going to be recipes in Italian food magazines, but we try to spread it out between recipes, features. News is important. We love like helping people navigate Rome for the first time or the 5th time. We have lots of travel guides, and we're lucky in that we have we have hundreds of different contributors. Probably maybe 25 regular contributors, and they're all over the U.S., Canada, and Italy. So tons of expats. So we love providing like inside information. So people go see, hey, I'm going to Venice for the first time. Where do I find out? So go to Appetito. So we try to keep it, on a high level. We're all pretty serious journalists. At least at the top of the magazine, we all written for pretty well-known publications. So we have a high standard about what our content is too. Love backstories about people behind the food. We do a thing called a chef story where I interviewed Stefano Secchi from Resdora, and he told me all about his life. I mean, he knew all about it. It was like 20,000 words when he finished talking. I had to trim it down to like 3,000. but like, people want to know what makes people like him dedicate themselves to food. It's a hard life. Right? I mean, you're working probably 7 days a week, if not six, right? Long hours. No guarantees who's going to come in any given day, especially when you first get started. So we're really interested about the people behind the food, the techniques that go into it, the traditions, of course. But all stuff that we deem to be like interesting to a wide range of people who are pretty sophisticated.
I think what you've described is exactly, this lifestyle, right? And that's really what kind of brought us together, and this integrated approach. And what's fascinating is that at the heart of it is really to help bring on as many other people into that culture, right? Because Italians love to really embrace everyone, and that's why there's so many Italophiles, as you and I've discussed, Andrew, right? They that really are fascinated with the Made in Italy stamp, with the way of life, with the aperitivo hour, right? With the pranzo, and then the cena, and then the dolce, and just really, but what it does to bring a community together. And I think what I love about what you've done with this publication is that you really focus on the integrated lifestyle, and stay away from a lot of the stereotypes that we know are circulating. And I'd be remiss not to mention the fact that you and I are about to launch the new column, the art of balance. And what I'm excited about is that there are so many C-suite executives, founders, brilliant professors, academics, influencers, people from all walks of life with impressive careers that have these passions that we don't hear as much about, right? That love travel or food or wine. And so I'm excited to explore that with you. And I think, the last question I had for you, particularly in light of UNESCO's recognition, is what Italian food tradition do you feel should be embraced more here in the US?
Well, I definitely, as touched on earlier, what I think is very important is locally sourced foods, simply prepared. And I know in the U.S. that's not accessible to everyone, so that's a hard one to preach for unless you live near a big city, in a big city, or in a part of the country where there's going to be markets that are nearby, that are sourcing products. But everyone can do this one. Everyone can eat with other people around the table on a regular basis. I miss the thing I miss most about my childhood is Sunday lunch at my grandmother's house. And I
Yeah.
would love to be able to do that again with my kids. But our families are also dispersed, right? I mean, when I grew up, we had 20 of us within 10 miles of each other, right? So we were at my grandmother's house every Sunday, no matter what. Right? There was no soccer game or birthday party or broken limb that was going to keep you from Nani and Nono's house on Sunday. And I loved it. It was such a magical experience that really informed my life greatly. And I'd love to see that tradition sort of reinvented with friends, right? If you don't have so much family around, like get your friends together to sit around on Sunday, for hours at a time, go to a restaurant or have it at your house, do potluck, whatever it is, being around the table together would be a really great tradition to sort of reintroduce, and then of course welcome people who from all backgrounds to do it. Because I know they all know we all did it, right? And I know they're all envious of it, especially my Irish friends, right? But like this is like a great way to sort of sort of reinvent an Italian tradition for modern times.
I actually agree 1,000%. I will say that is something every time I'm in Italy, I see so many communities setting up for these outdoor big dinners. And it's something that caught the eye of my kids when we were in Elba not too long ago, where it was during a week where there's, the local town feast. And then there was these massive, massive outdoor tables that were being set up. And it was to do exactly what you highlighted, to have a meal during this time of this feast with the entire community, which is beautiful. And that's a brilliant one. So I agree with you 1,000%. And I think, for me, I'm done with all my questions. Chris, anything else that you wanted to highlight, and anything you wanted to add to that, Andrew?
Me,
Well, I would just add,
I want
yes,
to
it doesn't
your
have to be like,
fundraiser. Your fundraiser. Talk about that. At what, April
oh yeah,
28th?
yeah,
Yeah.
please, yeah. So I am partnering with Luciano the Monarch, Luciano la Monarca. He's a award-winning tenor from Italy who now lives here in Westchester, and he has a 501c3 called the People of Hope. And within the People of Hope, he has an initiative called Pizza for a Smile. It's an initiative where they raise money to pay pizzerias to donate a certain amount of pizzas that are distributed mostly through No Kid Hungry, but all around the tri-state area or the New York area, most by and large, for those in need. We just had a little like a field trip the other day, an excursion where we went to Songanapoli, where the event's being held on April 28th. Songanapoli is a Neapolitan pizza place on West Houston Street, 132 West Houston. And we went there and we test ran the whole concept. We made 35 pizzas, got them in a car, brought them over to the Mission Bowery on the Bowery, and donated 35 pizzas to those who were in need of food. And it was really just a magical experience. I always felt in my life, if I was in a situation where I was in a position to help other people, I should. And the way I would do that is through feeding them, because I think that's the best thing you can do for somebody else, and it does. When you hand someone a pizza, a hot pizza, who's hungry, they're so appreciative. I will say the other food they had at the Mission Bar was pretty good too. They had like crab legs on the buffet, but the idea here, but on the event, is to raise a certain amount of funds where we can hopefully distribute a serious amount of pizza around the New York area. Again, it's April 28th. From 6 to 8. Tickets are $100. You can buy them, and they're 50% tax deductible, or you just make a donation if you can't make it. The peopleofhope.org website will have the ticket, the information on the event, or you can just contact me, Andrew Cotto, at andrewcottowriter@gmail.com. I'd love to just directly send you the link. And we are really excited about the evening. Luciano's going to sing a little bit. There's going to be great pizza, flowing wine and beer, and a really good festive atmosphere, like the feeling you get when you do something for other people.
That sounds
Sounds
amazing.
awesome. Sounds amazing. We'll try to get this posted before that to draw some more attention to that and put some links out there for you. If we can make it too, that would be great.
I'll send you the link.
Terrific.
This is great. Well, that ends another episode of Renaissance Minds. Again, so many incredible people out there doing really wonderful things to keep our heritage alive and make us continue to feel proud of being Italian American. Make sure you follow Renaissance_Minds on Instagram and follow along. We have a busy season of episodes coming up. People from all walks of life, but all doing the same thing for us, our blood, our heritage. So thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Thanks, Chris. And Andrew, look forward to doing more with you. Thanks again.
Thank you both. I really appreciate it.